Hello everyone and welcome to the video where I explain the lore of the Embodiment Universe. So for those who don't know, the Embodiment Universe is my short story slash book universe that I released on AO3, and while it started as just a simple trilogy, it has expanded into a full-fledged universe with lore and stuff. And I've gotten a lot of backlash for certain scenes in those short stories, which is to an extent completely understandable. But in this video, by explaining the lore, I hope to clear up some of that controversy and backlash. So let's begin. So the first era of the universe is the beginnings. So it starts from before the world was created. So there were 7 aspects: time, matter, order, consciousness, love, conflict, and memory. And every single one of these aspects controlled an aspect of everything, and none of them were above anything else. And they are in this universe above gods, and they basically, in the end, everything is up to the aspects. And they created the world, and they picked one planet, Earth, to create life in, and the others for that life to eventually explore. And this life grew into mankind, and it became so hard for the aspects as mankind developed so fast. Uh, it became so hard for the aspects to watch over them that they needed something to do with the watching over them for them. And because mankind didn't understand things, they created myths and stories and gods and monsters to explain them. They didn't know of the aspects, so they created these myths. And from this, the aspects decided to create another realm called the Atlas. And the Atlas surrounds the world but is untouchable by man. And in the Atlas, the things that mankind believes in, such as myths and gods, become real as long as someone believes in them, and they are able to interact with the world. And most importantly for this universe, the Greek gods, as they are the most relevant, as well as some Norse gods and myths. But Roman gods, Egyptian gods, not really important. But soon, a new god, the Christian god, started gaining more belief, as majority of mankind had faith in him. Most of the old gods, these being the Greek and Norse gods mainly, were forgotten, namely as mainly as the Christian god preached the idea of peace. Gods of war, such as Ares, were forgotten. And all of this caused wrath among the old gods, as they loved the power they had and didn't want to lose it. So they went to war with Earth. And while they could interact with Earth, they couldn't directly take form on Earth and go do things. So they created 7 entities to rival the aspects, and these later being named the 7 deadly sins by people who studied Christianity. And these 7 deadly sins, these entities, they cover all evil actions that a man can do. And they were powerful, and but even though they had a lot of influence and they were powerful, most of the old gods were still forgotten. But the presence of sins broke the aspect of order, as order was no longer preserved, as these sins were almost as powerful as the aspects. And this let the sins gain immense power. And one of the still remembered gods at this point is Hades, as there is a large cult called the Cult of Death, and all they believe in Hades. Although the name may sound like it, they aren't necessarily evil. They're actually quite good. And as an attempt to stop the sins, the Christian god spoke with the aspects, and they made a pact. This pact involved the aspects would give him the ability to create a perfect human to contain the sins, and in turn, God would promise to not get lost with his own power like the old gods did. The deal was made, and Jesus Christ was born. God created him and sent him on earth, and he was the perfect man. Thus, the sins couldn't touch him, because he didn't sin, as we all know. Uh, and in his death, the crucifixion, he channeled the power of the aspects to create a new realm called the Limbo, and he bound himself and the sins in there. But a small group of people who were called the Jesus' apprentices, based on obviously his real followers back in the day, they wanted him back and needed a way to reach him. And at the same time, there lived a person who studied myth and specifically afterlife, this being Dante. And Dante wanted to map hell and understand afterlife and myth more, and he was the first one to flesh out a theory called sin theory, which very poorly explained how sins work in this universe. And Jesus' apprentices found him, and Jesus' apprentices told Dante that if Dante, who knew about the Limbo's existence, would give them a way to get there, they would in turn tell Dante everything they know about the afterlife, and this deal was made. They told Dante about the afterlife, and Dante created 2 gates to the Limbo in the rivers Acheron and Styx. But instead of finding Jesus, they found an old man. He actually was Jesus, but they didn't know it. And he warned them of entering, and this was because if they opened the gates, Jesus wouldn't be able to come back, because if he did, the sins would be released too. But by opening the gates and entering Limbo, they still released the sins. And they killed all of the apprentices. And before the sins could actually affect humanity, Dante, with his new information, had understood a core function of the sins, which is embodiment, which I'm going to explain soon. Dante let all the sins to embody in him as a sort of promise, as an idea to give the sins the ability to walk on earth. But instead of doing that, Dante bound himself into the Limbo, becoming one of the many corpses at its border, where all those are dead who have had a sin embody in them. And the sins were bound, and the knowledge of Limbo is gone, as Jesus' apprentices and Dante were gone. But the sins still slowly, across many, many years, regained their power back. And now, the core function of the sins, which is embodiment. Aspects cannot do this, because this is, in this verse, an inherently evil thing to do. But sins are able to do this, and when a person sins enough, does a certain sin, that sin entity can gain so much power from that they are able to embody in them, and this is done by them entering that person's mind and being able to talk to them in there. They don't manifest, they don't possess, they just think with them and influence their actions. And this will be relevant in what I'm about to talk about next. So, the next main arc is the awakening. In the 1900s, all sins eventually became to live through a process known as perfect embodiment, where even after death, the host stays with the sin and they enter the limbo together, except for 2, Greed and Pride. So those 2, they devised a plan. Pride created an artificial superchild called Ian, the 2 mothers. It was a miracle in every way. He had high IQ, he aged twice as fast, until he had about the body and mind of a 20-ish year old. And he was basically better than everyone at everything. Smarter, more good physical, everything. And eventually Pride, he let Pride embody in him, and Pride was in him for a very long time. And in this process, he changed his name to Zagreus to honor the old Greek myth. And before we get to the Acheron saga, which is the core storyline, the core story arc, we need to cover a more minor one, which is almost as relevant, this being the main trilogy, the Embodiment trilogy. And this trilogy starts with the first one being Imbalance. So Imbalance is about a 19-year-old high school girl called Lisa who lives in Michigan, and she basically hates her own life. She is envious of everyone else and incredibly insecure. And this will be important later on. And he envies so much that envy is able to embody in her. And during this he has this friend group, which in addition to her has three people, these being Mark Carter and two people called Dave and Violet. And this story arc, and this being Violet E. Field and Dave's family name, I don't think I ever actually revealed that. But still, so Violet E. Field. And during Imbalance, they all go out. And during this entire day, Lisa has had these episodes where she sees herself in mirrors and sees herself warped. And everyone thinks that this is mental health or psychosis, but this is actually envy, the entity in her head, trying to make her think of herself worse, so she would eventually do an act which leads to perfect embodiment. And during this time that they're out, they eventually decide to go to eat in a place. But in this place, they only take cash, and Lisa doesn't have any, so she decides to hit an ATM. And at this ATM, she meets a person called Sarah. Now, Sarah Hills is a criminal. She is a criminal whose way of action is finding people, tricking them into thinking that she's nice, tricking them into getting her to their home, usually by sexual pursuit, and they had drugged them with drinks often, but sometimes not, and in this process they would steal stuff from the person's house. And Sarah hits on Lisa, and eventually she does get into her house. Now, they have sex. And this is one of the controversial parts, but just to clarify a sort of meta description, this is never detailed, and it's consensual and all that. And this is one of the core events, one of the most important events of the entire verse. So during this event, envy fully takes control of Lisa. As in the moment that she sees Sarah naked, she thinks that this girl is perfect. Her envy reaches a level which is strong enough for the entity to fully take control. And this is a thing present in many parts of the storyline. When a person just sees specific scene so much in a short amount of time, the entity is able to take control. And envy takes control of Lisa, and she influences her basically to kill Sarah, and that's what she does. And as a sort of shock value thing and as a lore device, she hangs Sarah's head in the room and then goes to the bathroom. And here, envy lets go of her, so she gains her own consciousness back and dies from her wounds, which were inflicted to both of them during her attack. And later on, Mark Carter is trying to find her and eventually calls the police, and police found her dead. And they take her body to the police station for later possible autopsy. And as Mark calls Lisa's mom. And here it is revealed that Lisa and Sarah are actually step siblings, half siblings. Now, yes, they did have sex, but that is to trigger, as to explain the controversy again, that event there is there simply to trigger the highest amount of envy in a short time as needed to let envy take control. And the reason they're siblings, it will make sense later. But for now, all we need is that Mark goes to Lisa's house and finds the corpse of Sarah, or the head. And during this time, Lisa has actually entered the limbo with envy. They are now one. And she enters Mark's head because now she is such a powerful entity that she can actually sort of possess people. She enters Mark's head and makes Mark kill himself because he was not allowed to let anybody know anything. And Dave and Violet later get married and move together. And I'm going to read a part of Imbalance, which is the police report of the crime. So it starts with Mark didn't sleep for the whole night. In the morning, he finally received the police's report on Lisa's case. It read, suspected crime, homicide/suspicious death. Victims 1 Lisa J. Davidson and 2 unidentified female victim, heavily suspected to be Sarah R. Hills. Date and time, 30th of 9th, 1992, within the time frame of 22:30 to 1:00 a.m. Time has been analyzed by examining the condition of the body and the location. Location 220 Ebony Street, 15B. Summary: at 2:33 on September 30th, the police received a call from Mark D. Carter stating that victim Lisa J. Davidson had not returned after the group had left her to supposedly get cash from an ATM. Lisa J. Davidson had informed the group that the ATM had malfunctioned and she was going home to get cash before returning. Lisa J. Davidson had not returned. At approximately 1:20, after the rest of their group had gone home, Mark D. Carter had gone looking for the victim. Reportedly at 2:30, he had ended up at the victim's home but couldn't get in. The police were called at 2:33. The police reached the location at 2:41. The location's door was locked and showed no signs of breaking and entering. The police entered the house under legal conditions by breaking the lock of the door. No immediate signs of trouble were seen. Both victims' shoes were placed right next to the door. The flat apartment's kitchen side was clean, except for the knife rack, which looked as if it had been hit by some object. The bed tucked in the corner of the room had its sheets crumbled and was bloodied, and had severed lower extremities of presumably Lisa J. Davidson lying on it. What could also be the second victim's eyes were found. No, what could actually be the first victim's eyes were found, actually. The roof had a rope on which the head of the second victim, for now unidentified but strongly suspected to be Sarah R. Hills, was hanging off of. The head was missing both its eyes and was heavily bloodied. The rest of the second victim's body was not found at the crime site. Clothes of both victims were also found near the bed. The dead and heavily mutilated body of the naked victim was found in the bathroom of the apartment, lying against the toilet. She had one blue eye and the other one was empty. The other blue eye was found on the floor. These eyes are heavily suspected to be those of the second victim. The victim's body had its lower extremities severed, and the victim's waist had deep lacerations which seemed to be applied by hand. There is currently no confirmation on if the victim applied these wounds herself, or if the other victim had applied them. The victim's body also had pieces of skin and flesh seemingly hot glued to her body in the chest and thigh areas. These pieces have likely been removed from the second victim. The body of the victim was disposed from the area and moved to the labs for possible autopsy at 3:43 after investigation had been completed. The remains of the second victim have been left at the location until an identification team has managed to come to a conclusion on who the second victim is. Victim 1, Lisa J. Davidson, 19, goes to Eganway High School at 24 Cillian Avenue. Lives alone. Parents Eric R. Davidson and Ashley S. Davidson. Divorced when she was 11. At 14, Lisa was diagnosed with unspecified psychotic spectrum symptoms. This is actually the time where envy started to appear in her and embody in her. Although a proper disorder could not be identified due to no proper experiences, no chronic diseases, or neurodivergency. Victim 2, officially unidentified, current clues point to Sarah R. Hills, 26. Officially jobless, uses drug drinks to seduce and rob strangers to make a living. Has been caught of many other crimes before, such as theft, sexual assault, and tax evasion. Lives alone. Father Adam A. Hills dead by homicide when she was 3. Mother unknown. Left Sarah. Sarah's mom was widowed until she remarried when Sarah was 4. Sarah was raised in the foster system. No diagnosis of neurodivergency or chronic diseases. Speculative hypothesis of narcissism and kleptomania. Summary of what could have happened based on evidence. Victim 1 went to get cash at the ATM, and somewhere there she met Victim 2. Victim 2 likely drugged Victim 1 and got to Victim 1's house. There they likely had sex, during which Victim 1 could have had a severe psychotic session and either attacked Victim 2, which led to her attacking in self-defense, or attacked Victim 2 and then hurt herself. End of report. And now, as here said, that Sarah's mother is unknown. She's actually Ashley Hills. Ashley Hills Davidson. Lisa's mother. And now the second part of this trilogy, where one of our most important main characters, Ryan, is introduced. And this one is called Consequences, and it's significantly shorter. So, it follows a boy named Chris, who is the son of Lucy and Ryan. Now, Lucy Carter is Mark's sister, and they had a son quite young, and Ryan was a bad person. It's important to the plot again, but he was, and sort of still is, an alcoholic and rapist. And what happens during the story is, so Ryan drinks every Friday, and as Lucy is a teetotaler, they often have fights about this. And during these times, Chris, who has high-functioning depression, runs to his room and tries to hide. But this very day, Ryan decides to come to the room and start telling Chris his past. And Chris didn't want to drink, but Chris didn't want to assay people either. So he becomes scared. And in a fit of rage that Lucy has towards him regarding Chris, he snaps. And this is actually the sin of lust embodying in him, but this is never revealed. But the sin of lust takes control briefly, and he assays and presumably kills Lucy, although later it will be revealed that Lucy is not actually dead. And this process leads to Chris killing himself and leaving one final recording tape, which he does a lot. And after these events, Ryan runs out of town and starts to get a better life. And he moves to Michigan. And in Michigan, he gets a job as a film/movie cameraman, and here he meets Dave E. Field, Violet's husband from the first story, who is actually the director of the film. And they lived pretty close to the film studio, so Ryan and Dave became really good friends, and they often visited his and Violet's house during breaks. So there's actually the thing that Ryan is the reason why Sarah was like she was. Because as a child, Ryan already had lust in him, and he as aid his own mom, Sarah. And this leads to Sarah becoming like she is later on. So Lisa, now one with envy, blames Ryan for her own death. And three people who she wants dead: Dave and Violet, because they didn't really ever care about her, and Ryan are all in one place now. So she notices them from the limbo and starts doing shit. First, she starts talking to Ryan and makes Ryan drink again. And he simply drinks a beer at Dave and Violet's place. And he starts, and Lisa starts manipulating him. And he kind of does this by making him think that Dave and Violet don't care about Ryan. They actually do care about Ryan. They didn't care about Lisa, but they do care about Ryan. And Dave challenges Ryan about the beer because he knows that Ryan does not drink and he shouldn't drink. And now, with under the manipulation of Lisa, Ryan starts saying bad things to Dave, and this leads to them getting into a small fight. And Ryan gets into a kind of a fit of rage, and he says that Dave should be scared of him and things like this. He says, "You think I don't see it, the way you look at Violet, the way you protect her, you think that makes you better than me." And Dave simply says that that's enough and wants Ryan to stop talking like this. And then Violet appears, and Ryan snaps and starts saying that Violet shouldn't be listening and that Ryan is scaring her, and Ryan replies, "This good," again, and Violet is pregnant with twins. Envy now switches to one of those fetuses inside Violet. This is a heavily alien-inspired scene, and she manipulates one of the fetuses. She basically gives the fetuses powers, and they do the chestburster thing to Violet. And now Violet is dead. And Dave is kind of depressed now because his wife is dead. And because Lisa was originally a huge fan of the Alien movie, this reminds Ryan of Lisa, and she starts thinking about the fact that she died mysteriously, and Mark died mysteriously too the very next day, and that Violet had a crush on Mark before she had gotten with Dave, and Mark rejected her by telling her that he's asexual, and this makes him think that, oh, maybe maybe Dave was Violet's second option. He tries to cope with the loss like this. And meanwhile, Ryan goes to liquor store and drinks a shitload. And he blacks out and has this sort of dream about what he did to his mom, this being Sarah. And Lisa's manipulating him because even though Ryan isn't like this anymore, Lisa manipulates him to think that yeah, he is. And eventually Dave finds him blacked out at the park. And quite soon, there's a scene of Dave's depression. And eventually they... eventually he... Envy fully takes over. Lisa fully takes over Ryan. She possesses him. And this makes him attack Dave. They fight. A simple fist fight. And Dave kills Ryan. It's that simple. In self-defense, he kills Ryan. And this just feeds Dave's depression. And he drinks. And while drunk, he sees a vision of the limbo. And he talks with Jesus there. And he's implied that Violet ended up in heaven, which makes him feel slightly better. But in this vision, he sees Lisa, now in a terrifying form, combined with the sin entity of Envy, and they start attacking him. And when he wakes up, he's under control of Lisa, and he starts looking at old files, which Violet never let him look at. And he finds that Sarah is Ryan's mother, that Lisa and Sarah have siblings, and that Lucy and Mark are siblings, and what Ryan had done, Ryan's past, and maybe most importantly that him and Violet are actually have always been related. Now this is a controversial writing choice of mine, but I simply made it to further emphasize Dave's insanity now that has been induced. And now Lisa attacks. So Lisa takes control of him and kills him violently, basically. First, he reminds him of who she is, and as he now understands who she is, he just kills her. She kills him. And here it is shown the power of this perfect embodiment, as there's this kind of black tendrils that came from Dave, as he sort of was in Dave, quote unquote. And then there's a reference to the first story, and then there's an implication to someone who's the highest of the highest, because there is a line, Dave didn't have a voice, but he screamed. Somewhere back in the mortal world, the highest of the highest heard it. The cycle had only begun. Embodiment was temporary, sin wasn't, and the highest of the highest here implies to the other sins, who all have had this perfect embodiment happen to them, like Envy with Lisa, except for Greed and Pride, and they all know that this has happened, that Envy, just Lisa, did something. And now we get to the Acheron Saga, and the Acheron Saga can be explained quite briefly. So, as we established before, Zagreus, a vessel made by Pride, a super child. So, during a high school Greek tour, the same high school which Zagreus was originally a part of, before he went into hiding due to trying to study his sin theory, and because he was a super child, scientists wanted to study him, and he didn't want to be studied. And during this tour, Zagreus had a lecture to the students about his sin theory, because he had reworked Dante's original sin theory. But this time it was how it actually worked, because Pride was instructing him and telling how it actually works. And they have this visit of the Acheron River, and there's a student called Lucas, and Acheron kind of pulls him in. Now this is actually because Greed is in the limbo and needs a body. So it tries to pull Lucas in. And Zacharias, as he is as prideful as he is, doesn't like others investigating the same things he is, as Lucas and his friend Elisa and Elisa's friend, who I don't remember the name of, go investigate the river. But Zacharias appears and kills the third person, and now they don't like Zacharias, but Zacharias actually covers up the entire thing. He manages to cover up his crimes for a very long time, and it's just dismissed as an unfortunate disappearance. But Lucas actually travels to Limbo, where he talks with Jesus, actually recognizes him as Jesus, and Greed embodies in him during this time. And he comes back. And sooner or later, Zacharias has continued his killing and kept covering things up. Greed manipulates Lucas into going and fighting Zacharias, and he almost kills him. This is all part of Pride's and Greed's plan. But Zacharias has to kind of go against it because he doesn't like being almost beaten, as he is so prideful. And he doesn't want Lucas to think that he's better than him, so he assails Elisa with the purpose of showing Lucas that, hey, I am better, stronger than you. And this is also a plot-relevant event because this gives Elisa the trauma that later reinforces her character heavily. So now, a private investigator has appeared at the hotel where they're staying at, this being an Australian guy called Marcus. And those three, Elisa, Lucas, and this Marcus, kind of become a team who try to stop Zacharias and understand things. But in the process, when Lucas fought Zacharias, a thing kind of happened where Greed gained so much power in a brief moment that he didn't even do a perfect embodiment, but rather he fully manifested into the real world as the entity. So not entity of Greed was in the real world. And you see, this cannot be good, obviously. And Greed goes to the world and starts doing things. And dun. And this leads some as Elisa runs out of the room where she was assayed, she has this big scar running from here, no, about here, all the way down there. All the security guy and one of the hosts there think that she self-inflicted these wounds and send her to an asylum. And in this asylum, they quote unquote torture her. They just make weird things, and she eventually escapes from there. And now Marcus tries to investigate the thing. And we are revealed that Zacharias has stored vials of blood from his victims, and he starts checking the map where to find the corpses of the people who had the perfect embodiment to manifest the entities of sin. And he runs away from the place, not before killing one more person. And he flies to Michigan, where obviously we can find Lisa Davidson's corpse. And one of the main things here is that the police station where they stored Lisa's body, which was stored there for later autopsy, the place was actually closed in 1997, so only 5 years later from the events of Imbalance. And the building was just left empty because of alleged paranormal activity. And Zagreus leaves, and he kills one of the hosts on the way. And Marcus finds this and goes to meet Lucas, and they know that he disappeared. And there's the thing. Lucas is constantly getting weaker and weaker, because when greed left him, it made a phylactery, so part of his soul is now gone, and because he has only a partial soul, he can't do things properly. And then Zagreus finds Lisa's corpse, and he goes around the world to get the sins to manifest, and he does that. And Lisa escapes the asylum, and Elisa escapes the asylum, and they find her, and now the sort of team is back up. And the final sin that Pride has left to manifest is Pride. But before that happens, we actually have to go through one important scene, which I'm just gonna read here. So when Lucas goes to sleep, I'm just gonna read the scene. Lucas found himself standing on a cold, and this is a stream, by the way. Lucas found himself standing on a cold stone brick floor, a Greek temple. He noticed the pillars lining the sides of the building. A voice echoed across the hallway. "You're late, Lucas Ayasaki." The voice was loud and strong, but not malicious, not angry. What? Lucas was confused. He walked through the building until he came across an altar of Hades. It was decorative with 2 lines connected in the middle by a ball, and in the ends by a circle surrounding the entire thing. Lucas reached out his hand to touch the altar. As soon as his fingers grazed the stone, Hades himself appeared. And now, here it is important to mention, Hades is still believed in because the cult of death is still actively operating. And am I dead? Lucas asked, knowing Hades was known as the god of the underworld of death. No, you're asleep, Hades replied, voice monotone yet still intriguing. Lucas sat on the stone floor. Why are you here? I'm here to talk to you. Hades answered his questions and then started talking. Ages ago, during the time when people still believed in me, fully. Lucas interrupted him. Did they truly ever? Why not believe something real? Hades continued. Ages ago, I and the woman who I was gifted, Persephone, had a child. This child was no ordinary child, he was a demigod, Zagreus. Hades changed his tone slightly. The woman was taken from me. Zeus gave her another child, Dionysus. They became one. Zagreus, a being of doom, a being of evil, and Dionysus, a being of virtue and of justice. This balance made the first Zagreus neutral. Lucas shifted slightly. Hades kept talking. But we were forgotten. Most of us gods died, all except I. Christianity took over. People started believing in a god who doesn't exist. He exists, by the way. People forgot Dionysus, but they didn't forget Zagreus because he was a trickster. He started walking the earth. When the Christ died, Hades kept talking, when people's belief had shifted to a system with no clear evil system, Zagreus made one to upkeep balance. As Christianity taught of the 7 sins, Zagreus made them real, then killed himself. So here it is revealed that Zagreus would have made the sins, which isn't true. The gods made him. But the gods simply made them through Zagreus. Hades walked down the altar closer to Lucas. These 7 sins walked the earth and caused chaos in every form, but a hero, a mythologist, a theologist, a poet, and a warrior known as Dante. He was the first to study these mythical theories and beliefs, and he popularized the concept of hell as we know it. Lucas took a step back. And then Zagreus proceeds to tell him about Dante. And Here is told one thing. But the entities control all sin. When someone sins enough, they gain access to their soul. They take control, and if this sin, this embodiment breaks, one of three things will happen. Most commonly, the sin stays and they die. Sometimes the person stays as part of the sin. And rarely, the sin escapes, often temporarily. But this process breaks the soul, it creates a fracture with whatever was present at the moment. This is what happened with Lucas and with Greed, and how the scene was able to manifest. And here it is also revealed, although briefly, that there were multiple rivers. There being two. And then Hades finally says, then the sin of pride started leading them. It created a vessel and named Zagreus with a body who obeys them and is superior to all. They desire to manifest fully again. And Lucas falls into a coma. And then Zagreus is killed in the manifestation process of pride, as he was only a vessel. This happens, and so actually Lucas does some more research, but he tries to understand what river it was, and finds out it was actually Styx. And now Elisa's trauma is out there more, and when Lucas realizes that the river is Styx, he finally falls into coma. And then the scene starts wreaking havoc around the world, and the tour ends, but Marcus actually rents an apartment there, and Elisa stays there with him. And Hades tells him some more stuff, confirms all of Lucas' theories, and then there's a sort of finale. Now, as Lucas has waken up after an entire year. Lucas is waking up, and it's actually here that Lucas and Elisa officially get together, which is crazy. They go to Acheron to get into Styx, and they get into Styx. Meanwhile, Marcus has managed to assemble a meeting of world leaders in Paris, and he aims to assemble all the scenes there, and he manages to do that. But they start absolutely massacring everybody there. But meanwhile, Lucas and Elisa find the corpse of Dante at the border. And Marcus managed to tell the world leaders about the scene, and they appear, start wreaking absolute havoc, and Marcus can't do anything. Military even appears, and a bunch of crazy stuff appears. But soon enough, so Lucas and Elisa share their moment. They have sex, and this is then used to revoke Elisa's trauma, sort of, to show her that, oh, it isn't always a bad thing. It isn't always violent. And Lucas has to sacrifice himself, and he does this because he is already halfway gone. He is missing half of his soul, basically. And he talks to and he sacrifices himself and lets Dante talk to Elisa. And there is a poem by Dante, because that's how he speaks. He's a poet. I carved a door when none should stand, from faith made blade, from myth made hand. I bent the rivers and named their flow, gave shape to pain so it could go. I watched the sins learn how to breathe, I watched them starve and I watched them seethe. No god had asked, no god had stayed, so mortal hands the order made. You walk where I once stood alone, where bones are walls and guilt is stone. The weight you feel is not your own, it never was, it never's known. Two parts remain, both paid in full, no bargain clean, no mercy dull. Hear them plain with open sight, for choice is sin when stripped of light. The first, I close what should not be, the gates drown shut and the rivers flee. The sins are bound, the breach is undone, the chaos ends, and the world moves on. You wake the sun to air to sound, no scars remembered, none unbound, no boy, no blood, no endless pain, no name that ever meant you pain. You live untouched, you live complete, ignorant peace and flawless sleep. The second path is marked by fire, by memory sharp as rusted wire. You keep the truth, you keep the cost, no face unblurred, no moment lost. You will remember what was seen, the reverse pull, the in between. The sins, the wall, the weight, the lie, the choice that taught the soul to die. But he returns not spared, not whole, still cracked but breathing, still a soul. He walks the world with open eyes, knowing that what lives beneath its lies. No seal will hold, no door will stay, the truth will rot, the cracks will play. Yet love survives the weight of blame, and meaning lives where scars remain. Choose now, child of borrowed time, forget the verse or bear the rhyme, for mercy heals by cutting deep, and memory is the price you keep. And then Dante gets up. And basically, the choices here are that she could forget all the events, fix the world. Well, he would fix the world either way, but she could either forget all the events, and Lucas would be fully gone, and she could live peacefully, perfectly. And if she decided to remember the things, Lucas would come back but stay broken, still not having a part of his soul, and always aware of this limbo thing. And she's so in love that she can't make the decision because both are bad to him. And she begs Dante to bring him back whole, give him his soul back, and even offers to let Lucas get part of her soul if that's what it requires. And Dante says that the soul cannot be restored. What was broken cannot be made intact again. And he says, I can end chaos, I cannot undo consequence. And because of so much love, the aspect of love appears as sort of a vision to them. And she tells that their souls, because there's so much love, they are kind of one, and that Elisa would be able to give Lucas a part of her own soul, not enough to harm Elisa, but enough to anchor Lucas, keep him normal, and Elisa is absolutely flabbergasted what she can do this, and Love says that she basically already has done this, and she simply didn't know of it. And they still forget each other. But they will also forget all these things, and the world will be restored. And this happens, and as this all happens, they do the decision. The entities are simply gone, bound to the limbo, fully this time. And they all forget the thing. Well, Marcus doesn't forget it, but Lucas and Elisa do, but they don't remember each other either. And everyone basically just moves on with their normal life, but Lucas and Elisa briefly see each other across the street, but don't recognize each other. But there is implied that because of the love aspect, they will eventually find each other again. And it is implied that Jesus is now dead, fully dead in the limbo. He exists no longer, and the limbo is eventually closing because it is no longer needed as the sins are gone. And then there's an epilogue which takes place in 2031 about a prisoner who is a prisoner, a convicted murderer who starts giving a speech in court about how society treats them as monsters and these objects which should be done something about. And it is implied that he breaks out First, it's implied that he knows about sin, but it's also implied that he breaks out of jail. And this final arc, which I haven't written yet, but it is the Odin program. So I'm going to explain it shortly because, as I said, I haven't written it yet. But the Odin program is so there's a cult called the Cult of Odin, which so there's three major groups in this: the Cult of Death, Cult of Odin, and this mass murderer guy's anarchy group. And it starts with the anarchy group starting to wreak havoc all over Norway, where this all happens. And the Cult of Odin sees all these people as easy to manipulate subjects because they want to bring Odin back because they believe, through study, that Odin knew of the Ragnarok and that Ragnarok will actually make the world better, and that an Odin knew an alternate timeline that he could create, which causes Ragnarok. And so they want to bring Odin back with devices that force people to believe in Odin. So they see the anarchy group as a good subjects, but the Cult of Death, who worship Hades, see Ragnarok as a bad event. So they start trying to stop the what Cult of Odin does, and the story is going to follow two agents from the Cult of Death who try to stop Odin's cult, and the anarchy group is kind of caught in between them as this sort of morally gray group, and it's just cult war, secret agent stuff, cool stuff. Less horror, more action. So that's what it's going to be. It will release eventually. And now, there are a few other stories. First of all, Isn't It Beautiful? It's a short story which takes place in an unknown timeline, and it is fully metaphorical. So it's about this boy who has this sort of cove near his house, which his parents want him not to go to, but he eventually goes there. He's a child, he likes to break rules, and he goes to the cove, and it is absolutely beautiful, full of white, pale flowers. But he realizes soon, he starts visiting this place often, and it's manipulating him. It's basically forcing him to go there, and when he sees an animal or bug there, the flowers slash out and kill them, and eventually, his mom goes to the cove, and the flowers kill the mom, and then eventually the boy too. And this isn't actually, well, it is a real event, but it's quite metaphorical, and it is about the white flowers are an great entity that was created upon the sin's death called the Purest. And when all sin disappeared, a perfectly good entity was then created, which is the Purest, as a sort of compromise. Because the aspect still didn't fully function, so the world needed a balance, which appears to be the Purest. And the alternate timeline that Odin sees is a timeline where the Purest spreads and kills everything, this being Ragnarok. And this is sort of used as a way to kind of tease the Ragnarok thing. But this is actually the alternate timeline, which we're never going to actually touch, except in a dream sequence. And then there is a very short story called Two. And this is about Scott getting from home, and Scott's girlfriend is an asshole and shouts at him, and he goes to sleep, and he wakes up at 2 a.m. and he starts running, and he starts following a raven. But not before he starts thinking of a poem, which goes, one little boy running on a field, one strong god dreaming of release. One little boy stumbled down the floor, one strong god prepare his troops for war. A boy in front of a god, faced by the beauty. A god in front of a boy, traded his eye for duty. He dreamed of life and construction, he dreamed of destruction. They intertwined, forever they'd stay, the hate they break, the moment of fate. Why did you let me here in the face of fate? And this implies two people: the boy from Isn't It Beautiful and Odin, because the boy is a representation of Odin. In the timeline where Ragnarok does not happen, Odin sacrifices himself to the purest to stop Ragnarok. And this is the timeline that the Cult of Death tries to preserve. And Scott runs across the country for a long time, following the Raven, and eventually he just turns to ashes. This is actually because this sounds absurd. It's gonna make sense when I eventually release the Odin program. But so Scott is actually a sort of god, and people a representation of a god, and this is what kind of happens when they stop believing in him. And this is the god in question is, well, it's not really a god, but in my universe it is a god, the Wendigo. And then the poem continues: he did it for knowledge, memory entwined, eye for an eye, a fair price of pride. Twice immortal faith, believe it persists, twice for the white flower gone with the wind. And that again ties back to the representation of Odin and the Ragnarok with Isn't It Beautiful. And then there's finally a short teaser of the Odin program, which goes as follows: a metallic raven flew down and sat on a rock. It looked to its side, and we saw a diamond in the shape of an eye. In the other direction, there was one in the shape of a heart. A man hummed the melody of Wellerman slowly. Odin had the information, it said. The raven flew off. It wasn't the raven who spoke. So there's a robot raven, and a diamond in the shape of an eye, and in the shape of a heart. These represent the aspects of consciousness and love, and the raven is the Odin program's actual thing. The man is one random sailor, because Odin program is set in Norway. It is this, and it, in this case, it isn't the metallic raven, but rather it has a speak, and it's a man talking through it, and he tries to get these people to follow the cult of Odin. So it's as simple as that. And I feel like you understand most of the lore now. And as to address the controversy, I'm gonna address it one more time. So first of all, I do not fantasize about these things I write. I feel like I have confirmed it many times now, but this is actually supposed to be more of an epic mythology-style saga. And even though there are essay scenes, there are lots of violence, I can tell you exactly where it comes from. So the original trilogy was actually made as a gift to my then girlfriend, who reads those quote-unquote BookTok books, and I tried to make something that she would enjoy, so I wanted to put in sex scenes. But I like horror, and I had this idea of this great universe, so I decided to combine all of them and start creating this deep lore, which I then placed all of these stories in. And I'm going to pull up some messages here. So yeah, no, I don't fantasize about those things. I would never ever do those kinds of things. I simply write them in as plot relevant things, and I'm going to read some of these messages that I sent to. Oh, and also a lot of the sexual stuff is actually there because I love the Alien films, and Alien films have a lot of sexual undertones, negative ones, and I tried utilizing those to create more horror. But I'm going to read some of these messages I sent to my friend just to confirm. So, quotation marks. The trilogy and the others are fiction. I created a world full of complex lore and created the world logic, which I then expanded upon by creating story arcs, which I roughly planned and made make sense using different events. Understandably, in a short story form, it reads easily as just unnecessary events, but they are not. I also try to create shock value because I'm quite bad at creating good psychological horror atmosphere. If you're talking about the few essay scenes I wrote, firstly, they fucking suck. suck. I can't write that well. And second, they serve a heavy plot purpose. I don't want to do stuff like that in real life, etc., nor was it written as some sort of gooning material. If you're talking about the second part, which includes the suicide story, yes, I drew inspiration from my experiences, but I'm genuinely not even close to that bad of a situation, not at all. My parents are great, and my life is also for the most part. As for the third story, I tried to turn it more epic, and in the Acheron saga, big story after that, I leaned even more into the action and epic elements. The reason it may feel absolutely disgusting is because I drew a lot of inspiration from Stephen King, and because the trilogy was intended as a printed book as a gift for my ex-girlfriend, so I tried leaning into elements she would probably enjoy reading. I'm sorry if this concerns you, but I swear it's just fiction. And another message. So to come into some sort of a conclusion, you read my first works based me on those. All the disturbing content in those was for the plot, but definitely overdone, as I am a quite bad writer when it comes to proper horror. The goal of the universe I am writing is still to be more so a mythology and dark, grounded fantasy-based epic saga with many story arcs. Even though those events are over the top and I wrote them, it doesn't mean that I think about those acts like violence, sexual violence, etc. in a glorifying way. I use them as a shock tool and I write analytically. My end goal is to create a cohesive universe with internal crossovers, cohesive world logic, and mythology style incredibly unlikely stuff, like the plotline in the trilogy where all the characters are actually related. If you still think that I am mentally unstable for writing this, you're wrong and you are simply judging by my first works and unable to see the thought process behind the whole thing. And if you assess my age with not being able to handle or process dark content or whatever, you're just wrong. Stephen King was 18 when he started writing Carrie, and Stephen King began writing overall I think, when he was 14. I heavily enjoy complex lore and stories, even if they have darker elements. I like the plotline and lore of The Boys, but I definitely won't be watching it because I do not want to see the shit that's in it. Same with Squid Game, although that I have partially watched. Same with reading the Stephen King books. Hollow Knight lore, FNAF lore, Alien lore, etc. They all have dark content and themes, but I love them for their complexity. My works appear over the top because, well, they are. I don't glorify that stuff. I just suck at writing. Importantly, I don't like limiting myself when writing, and I use dark elements as tools to advance the mythos. You know, Greek myths' major plot lines include Zeus raping like half of the gods. If I wrote that, it would be shitty, yeah, but it is normal content in myth literature because it makes sense considering how myth originated. And as I've mentioned many times, I'm writing a universe where mythology is a core aspect, and most of existing mythologies are real. Zagreus, Odin, Jesus, world aspects, Ragnarok, Hades, Wendigo, etc. can be real under conditions by the world logic. Thus, I also want to lean on theatrical and dramatic scenes to use the mythology. That's why I still do over the top stuff in my later works, but just as less over the top, you know. And then I ended up clarifying that I am not struggling with anything, I do not fantasize that stuff, and they are simply fiction. And as for how the story will continue, I lean even more on the epic parts and probably completely drop out the horror in the Odin program. I will still write shorter stories which will include horror elements, but as I'm trying to improve as a writer, I will try to create more psychological horror. Now, I hope you learned something about the lore of my universe and learned that the controversy is quite unnecessary. Thank you for watching. See you in another video. Thank you.